All right, welcome. This is Eric Green, and I want to warmly welcome you to the American Mental Health Foundation sponsorship of this webinar. We still have a few more people trickling in, and I want to thank first and foremost the American Mental Health Foundation in its 90th year for supporting this webinar, as well as my forthcoming webinar on November the 6th rather, at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which will be on disaster mental health. Please do visit the website at americanmentalhealthfoundation.org. For technical support, our thanks go to CAI, celebrating 35 years of change and inspiration. And you can read more about them. That's where we're actually filming live right now in New York City at caiglobal.org. And so while you may not be able to see my face, you can certainly hopefully hear my voice, and there'll be lots of pictures coming down the pipeline in the webinar of my work with adults doing play and expressive arts. For a couple more housekeeping items, for certification following this program, visit AmericanMentalHealthFoundation.org and then click on news item August 27th, which is the sign up here for the September 5th webinar by Eric Green, and then click on the last paragraph. You can also, to make it a little bit simpler, as I have here, okay. There we go. You can go to obtain the CEUs, http://CE AmericanMentalHealthFoundation.org. Also, since we're in such a tight time block here, as I'm sure many of you are probably at work right now, if you want to read anything more about me or my work, I'm not going to necessarily talk about that, but you can certainly visit my website at drericgreen.com, or visit me at Facebook at facebook.com/Dr. Eric J. Green. A last housekeeping reminder before we dive into the material is please remember to use the chat function. The way that I have organized this webinar is that you're encouraged to participate and to ask questions and also to make comments, and I will be acknowledging those as they come up, and depending on how many participants we have total and how many questions, I'll try to get to all of the questions, or at least most of them. And that just simply requires you going into the comment or chat box on the right side of your screen and typing that in. And please don't wait till the end. You're welcome to comment throughout. And I guess we'll go ahead and begin. The premise of this webinar rather, is for me to, or for us rather, to engage in a dialogue about what is required for us to engage adults in play and expressive activities. And there were so many different avenues that I could have approached with this topic. I decided to, as an editorial decision, as I know most of you are mental health practitioners, was to make this about self-healing and renewal. So while I've geared this presentation to those of us who are practitioners, how can we use play and expressive techniques with ourselves for self-care, hence the term self-care in the title of the webinar. But you can also globalize and certainly externalize these techniques with your adult patients in your practice. So as we go through the objectives and the upcoming assessment that I'm going to go over with you, just keep in mind that while today's webinar is geared towards self-healing and self-renewal, these are certainly usable and mutable with adults. So our objectives, which will be listed throughout the webinar, are basically for me to provide you a couple of resources rather, of what the research shows in the benefits of play and the expressive arts, as well as a couple of actual play-based interventions that I use with adults, and a couple of implications about the self-healing and renewal properties of using this paradigm with adults. And you'll notice there will be pictures throughout the webinar. These are pictures very recently, most of them actually are very recent, of me providing play therapy and expressive art trainings with practitioners and adults. And so that's where these images came from. So here's, to start us off, here's a kind of a brief overview of how I conceptualize play in the expressive arts. It's typically an engagement in some type of creative activity that involves self-expression and the use of the imagination for therapeutic purposes with someone who is trained and qualified to do so. And we oftentimes don't see or don't read much about, or it's very scant in the literature, of the use of play therapy as a self-care technique or with other adults. I believe the typical, or probably the popular view, is that play therapy is often used with very young children. And what the research is showing, and what is encapsulated in Charlie Schaefer's book from a few years back, as well as my new book with Athena Drews on this topic, is that play can certainly be used with adults. And it actually comes from the very humanistic paradigm from Dr. Carl Rogers and Virginia Axline, who promulgated a theory that really believed in the client's ability to lead their own way to their healing, to individuate, to reach the zenith, or to the paradise, psychological paradise from within. And so, being a play therapist myself, and engaging with parents, and because I don't see many adult patients independently, the primary context that I see adults is always as a parent, because I treat young children. I have a part-time practice, and so part of the overview of this piece that I wanted to mention before we go on is that the relationship is what heals, not these techniques. And while these techniques certainly can show a reduction in hyperarousal and some different other topics we'll talk about soon, it's really the relationship that we have with other adults professionally in the psychotherapeutic context that provides the healing mechanism. And those are, I think, embodied within a triumvirate of tenets that are espoused by Axline and Rogers, and those are non-judgmentalism, therapeutic support, which doesn't always mean we support the client in everything that they bring to us, especially as parents, but we try to acknowledge their feelings and understand their motives behind it so that we can help them with greater sense of awareness so that they can potentially make different or maybe even better decisions to support their children through whatever developmental disruption may be occurring. And then unconditional positive regard, which I think is about having good boundaries. It's about us not projecting our shadows onto other adult patients or parents that we're working with, and to maintaining a sense of a forward thinking and of a general sense of well-being that we are attempting to motivate towards. And so here are some items that I included before we really get into the heart of this webinar. And these are really to help you, not to help you, but maybe to assist you as you take the post-test for the CE. So I kind of bunched a lot of these together. Play therapy and play itself, which takes many different forms with adults, but my theoretical premise and research-supported position is that it reignites in adults a sense of what James Hollis, the Jungian analyst down in Houston, Texas, calls archetypal imagination. And I think that when we are feeling very stressed at work, or when we're feeling compassion fatigue or burnout from our patients and or from our children, perhaps, for those of us who have kids, and there is some sense that our psyche leads us to a sense of renewal. And sometimes we try to find that sense of renewal through venting, by talking, sharing our concerns of the workday, going through difficult experiences and finding comfort through our partners or our close friends, or sometimes we even go to therapy, or people come to us on the other end of this. My argument for this webinar is that what works for you and within that context, or for other adults, I think should be maintained, but also to add in a layer of wellness and of holistic and a creative sense of integration, which would not be overwhelming that it's done all the time, but would be done consistently, so that ego strength and resources are buoyed up over time. And that's what we really see as play therapy being the healing factor, is the relationship we develop with young children. That relationship, most of the healing that occurs is between the moments we have with the child that are sometimes before the session, after. It's not so much about the sand play that we use or the art. It's really about our response and our validation and our consistent humanity that we engage with the child. And that's very similar to play therapy with adults, and by using these mechanisms. And so I've included, puppet play. I do this with parents frequently, is how to have what I call difficult dialogues or critical conversations with their kids. I offer them suggestions, and one is to do puppet play. So we role play through puppet play of different ways they can provide their children with maybe different alternatives, or if something is not going right with chores or in the house. And then for those adults who aren't parents necessarily, possibly, there's so many different techniques, but I also introduce the option of painting for those adults who have a creative bent. And painting has a way of allowing for self-expression to occur, and I think it's one of the expressive techniques that we can use with adults, and I'll be talking about that more later, in a variety of settings, like in our office. I actually do some of my filial work with parents outside, and there is something healing about reconnecting with nature. I'm going to talk about you and our own self-care, about the benefit of going outside and getting some air. For example, last night I flew here to New York last night to film this webinar today, and I was in an airport and in a plane for many, many hours. I was feeling a little, and as soon as I got to Manhattan and I'm walking in the streets, I felt revitalized. I felt alive again. It was just by being in the outside, in the outdoors, with the hustle and bustle. And so sometimes it just takes us to just remove ourselves from our office for a little while, or from the monotony of being at our desk. Expressive arts and play can have a couple of different benefits, different demographic groups and things you can see. So the first learning objective is about the research support, and that was list 2 research-supported benefits of incorporating play therapy with adults towards self-care and renewal. And most of this information comes from, as I mentioned earlier, my latest book with Athena Trues. And some of the items here, as you can see, by using creative mechanisms like painting, like sharing music, looking at lyrics, drawing, movement, going outside, and things which we'll be covering later, we see that it increases self-expression. And when an adult feels, when we feel as though we're able to self-express, oftentimes what we see is that anxiety there's a correlation with an anxiety reduction. And once there's an anxiety reduction, there might be an increased feeling of self-worth, because then there is a sense of validity, because anxiety is lowered, motivation's increased, and then we may be able to engage with people and then with our positions, our work, in a more effective way. That's a picture below of me doing sand tray therapy with some adults a few months ago. There's several other benefits. I just wanted to kind of encapsulate the basic ones, and I think they all lead up to helping an adult remember what it's like to engage with their archetypal imagination. And there's many ways we'll talk about those. I've got several slides, but coloring is one really terrific way. Smelling Play-Doh, I think part of what our experience with using play therapy with adults is not to, and even with ourself in a self-healing mechanism, is not to become childlike, because then we sort of become that personification of the puer aeternus or the puella aeterna, which is sort of like the Peter Pan. We simply want to rekindle that within us that brought us joy from our childhoods. So for some of us, it might be laying in freshly cut grass and smelling the grass. For me, it's going to the beach and building sandcastles, and I do that, as a almost 38-year-old man. And so there's something intrinsically healing, and I want to talk a little bit about assessment. How do we assess when we could benefit from the use of creative and expressive arts with adults or with ourselves for self-healing? And so, as I said earlier, this webinar is really centered towards other mental health practitioners. So if we have sort of a sense of satisfaction, then we feel positive that we're in positive or beneficial relationships, that our work is benefiting society, and we feel a sense of self-efficacy. There's some sense of self-worth, and so there is some satisfaction, because most adults come to us as patients for primarily two reasons. At least it's been my experience working with parents, and one is there's problems in their personal relationships with family members or romantically, or with their kids, family. And the second is there's problems going on at work, and that's relationship-based as well. And so one of the first questions I ask parents is, where do you derive satisfaction and pleasure from? One of the greatest, I think, gifts that we can possibly introduce to clients, to adults, is to introduce the idea that once we get our own emotional needs met, we don't have to get those needs met through our children or through our partners. There is a huge relief that comes from finding satisfaction in self-care. It puts a lot less of the burden on our loved ones. And using play and expressive arts, like we're going to be talking about, or we are talking about today, is one mechanism. It's not the only one. There's many. There's also mindfulness, meditation, physical activities. There's many different types of reflective prayer, contemplative prayer. But I think this is part of an overall picture of what we can do to begin to meet our own emotional needs. When our needs aren't being met, when as adults or as parents, we begin to feel burned out. And these are some psychological side effects of feeling dissatisfied with our A, familial or romantic relationships, or B, with our relationships at work, and maybe our accomplishments or lack of, or feeling diminished or devalued in some way. So There's also a sense that when we're feeling burned out, that we're in a non-sort of supportive environment that our supervisor doesn't understand, is that maybe if we're a play therapist, that the parents we're working with continue to make the same maybe not so good decisions, and we're still, kind of having conversations with them frequently about undoing some of the things that have been done that are compromising their children and their families' psychological gestalt, or the whole. As for us as helpers, just to narrow this a little bit more and to make it really relevant to you who are listening to this webinar, is oftentimes we're affected not only sometimes by burnout, but also by compassion fatigue, or what we also call secondary traumatic stress, which is work-related to having to deal with secondary stressors or people who are indirectly related to something we're doing. Also, there is a source of an internalization, I think, of some psychological poison, and this is another term called countertransference. Sometimes we take on, and I think I was just speaking about this earlier this week to a group in North Carolina at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and I was talking to them about Jungian play therapy and how, Jung once said no true physician can stand outside of his work without being burned in some vulnerable spot. For a true physician always stands in the thick of it. And so I think countertransference it's not a bad thing, and it's certainly not to be avoided. It's to be cultivated, as it's the crux often of psychotherapeutic change in our relationships with adults, with parents. I think the tone that I was attempting to bring to this presentation by inserting this topic is, when we as helpers, or we're working with adults as parents in our play practice or expressive arts, sometimes we take on some of the fiery elements of countertransference and we internalize that, and we may need a way to release that. And so I have some different side effects, or some attributes of what it might look like if you're feeling burned out, or if you're working with an adult who's burned out, or with a parent who's feeling burned out, which we see a lot. And so I look at that as a dichotomy, is when you're looking at these slides, and I'm going to ask here for a question if anyone has one in a minute, but thinking about yourself first, not that we're becoming these narcissistic individuals, but we have to get our own needs met before we can meet the needs of others. Jung once said we can only go so far in psychotherapy as we've gone ourselves with patients. So think about these in terms of, am I experiencing any of these? And then think about beyond that, are you working with adults who are? And so, one of the biggest, I think, symptomatologies that we see is fatigue and depression. It's a sense of dysphoria and a disinterest in the things that we used to find of interest. With compassion fatigue, which it's really directed to all of us who are helpers, or when we're working with adults who are in the helping professions, which is frequently, we see a lot of blaming. I think it's really hard when we are feeling a little put upon and distressed, and there's multiple things going on, and we have kids that we're trying to take care of, and we've got a stressful job. It's hard for us to take responsibility and for us to be self-accountable at times for our own contributions to the mess that we've oftentimes directly created, and I include myself in that picture. It's very hard for me at times to look at things very honestly. It's easier to look at it opaquely, I think. And so one of the surest signs that I find when I'm working with adults is that there is burnout or compassion fatigue, or that expressive arts or play may be of some interest for imaginative purposes, is when I notice adults consistently blaming others, or not only blaming but redirecting responsibility to others consistently. That's a less reflective state people are placing themselves in, which usually has to do with being fatigued and having a diminished sense of self-worth. Here are some additional symptoms: exhaustion, hopelessness. Geez, I can certainly relate to the fourth bullet I put here: high expectations of self and their others. I don't think any of these in isolation would indicate fatigue or burnout or compassion, but I think if there is a consistent pattern of a predominance or of several of these attributes, then it would be a cause for additional assessment or psychometric or diagnostic work. Sometimes it's really easy for us just to ask adults, you've been talking about headaches and exhaustion and hopelessness, hypertension. You're feeling, you're not feeling much joy. What would you think about engaging in some play-based activities or some expressive arts? And usually the first thing that parents ask me is, well, isn't that what you do with my kids? And how would that help me? And I say, well, playing is a natural part of life, not just for kids, but for us as human beings. It's how we, work out things from our early childhood, and it's also a way of us reconnecting to an inner part that can help buoy us in later times of turmoil. And so sometimes there's some resistance, other times there's disbelief, sometimes, very infrequently, there is a genuine engagement and an interest in doing that. So I want to stop right now. I've sort of been kind of providing a lot of information here and talking rather quickly. I just want to slow it down a minute. Does anyone have any questions so far, or another way to frame how to set up the introduction of play therapy within adults or the expressive arts? Does anyone have something that they say, or just be thinking about that? How can you go about introducing, this topic to adults in your practice? I think that there's not a right or wrong way to do it. I believe that what I always try to remember is to incorporate the sense of imagination and the importance of having a break from the adult linear logical thinking all the time, as that can become cumbersome. Okay, so moving on, these are some basic organizational symptoms of compassion fatigue. Decreased willingness of staff to work together on teams, a lack of flexibility, and irritability. I don't think I included that, but that's certainly including in ourselves when we feel irritable, or when we have a sense of negativity. Yesterday I was walking down the very, very long blocks of New York City, and I was almost run over by a van. This was last night. Who was backing and didn't even look. I mean, I literally, it was probably 2 inches, and he just really reversed it really quickly. I would have at least been knocked to the ground if he would have hit me, which probably wouldn't have been a good thing. But instead of, cursing him out, or, I just, I remained positive and thought, wow, I'm in the city of vitality. You just got to navigate it. So I think maintaining positivity is important, and I think when we become very negative and irritable with the happenings of life, we start to see fatigue and certainly a sense of renewal. So if no one has any questions or comments so far, I want to do this self-assessment with you right now. And I think I've got 9 or 10 items here. And this is something that you can also use with your adult patients or parents, or you can tweak it. There's many assessments for feeling burned out, for feeling encumbered. That's not to do with the typical DSM diagnostic labels. So I used this one, this self-assessment, because of the interest of time. I chose one, but there are many, and you can certainly find those by looking in any recent psychometric assessments or any of the wellness literature. Jane Myers and Tom Sweeney have done a lot of work in wellness and assessment, and they've written a few books on the topic. And so anyway, so as we're reading through these, I want you to be thinking about them. And if it sort of goes like this, I arranged these that if you have at least one on each slide, that there may be a cause for you to be thinking about. Maybe it's time for some happiness, some renewal. Doesn't mean that you're burned out or have compassion fatigue. It just could mean that maybe you might want to engage in some more self-reflection, or maybe even seek a consult with a colleague, or if you notice this in a parent, or if a parent takes this assessment, it would probably be the cause for some additional exploration, and certainly should raise an orange flag that to see maybe if an expressive or play therapy technique may be helpful. So the first one is personal concerns commonly intrude on my professional role. I think it has to do with boundaries. The second, my colleagues seem to lack understanding. I think that's a lot to do with what we spoke about earlier, irritability and displacement of blame. I find even small changes to be off-putting or draining. Okay, so then now we're going to go to the second slide. If you've had one of those so far, just take a note or write a note. I can't seem to recover quickly after association with traumatic material. This also has to do with watching movies, with experiencing. It doesn't necessarily mean a traumatic event, but it could mean exposure to even the news, watching the news recently, the American journalist who was beheaded, unfortunately, which was a tragedy by the Islamic State in the Middle East. And so that was extremely disturbing to even hear that could have happened. And so when we see images occurring in the news, in movies, even in life, how do we recover from that? And so if you are not recovering too quickly, or if it goes beyond a sense of humanity that you're concerned about it for a couple hours or maybe a few days and talk to your colleagues, but if it becomes a preoccupation, morbidly so, then it could be a cause just to explore that further to see where that might be originating from. Are you experiencing burnout? Is it time for renewal? Number 5, association with your patient's material affects you very deeply. This could also be substituted for adults who were affected by their coworkers significantly in their lives. How much are we enmeshed? But also, do we take on and internalize the psychological poison of others? And I think as a play therapist, when I'm working with young children, especially the trauma work that I do, I think sometimes it does happen. I'm a human being, and I certainly experience and inwardly acknowledge empathy and feel that intuitively, and sometimes it's hard to sleep at night. Sometimes some of the cases that I come across, something I just finished with just recently in my practice, and so. But I think if it affects you very, very deeply for a considerable period of time, I think that would be a cause of concern. Also, we had a piece about stress. Okay, next slide. I've lost my sense of hopefulness. I feel vulnerable a lot of the time, and I feel overwhelmed by unfinished business. Again, don't take these in isolation, but if you have a preponderance of these that you're identifying with, and there's a pattern, and it's beyond the typical, then I would say, you might want to do some more exploration. One of the ways you can explore this is by taking the ProQual, which is the Professional Quality of Life Screening. And here's the website. I believe it's there's no charge for this exam. If you go to this website, you should be able to take it. I also give this to parents sometimes, especially if they're in helping professions or educators. I've noticed several of the parents I've worked with, adults or educators, are in the education field. Probably because some of the referrals, many of us have, are from kids from school counselors and our teachers. So, so this is a terrific, I think, not terrific, but I think it's a necessary next step. If you're noticing some of the symptoms, then you do the self-assessment, and then the next logical piece would be the ProQual. And so if you've determined that after those pieces, or let's say you're working with an adult in your play therapy practice who is complaining about feeling depressed or sluggish and things, my next recommendation would be to create a specific self-care management plan. And the self-care plan should encompass these 5 major areas that we're about to cover. And what I'd like for you to do from this webinar today is, as we're having this discussion, is I want you to have a notepad on the side, or if you're in your computer, notes, and I want you to take, there's going to be 4 to 5 probes in each of these categories. I want you to find 2, and I'm going to go through some of these with you of how to construct your self-care management. It's not enough just, we're going to do guided imagery in a little while, and I'm going to do several different expressive techniques. I'm going to show you mandalas and things. But it's not just enough for us to, I think, be affected by that and to deep breathe. We also, as practitioners, as educators, as humans, we need to have some type of written, in my opinion, plan. The research shows that people who adhere to written plans or written contracts are more apt to continue to engage in self-care strategies than those who do not. That's also true in Judith Beck's research with weight loss. And so the physical piece, are you maintaining regular sleep? Do I exercise regularly? So let's just say I ask you to take 2 of the questions and then come up with a plan. So it would be a strategy. So like on my first piece of paper, I would put physical. And then let's say I took those 2, and I would say over the next 2 weeks, and I would do a self-care plan for like a month, and then I would change it a little bit each month until it becomes a sort of a regular part of your wellness approach. So I would say, let's say I will get 6, or actually what doctors now recommend is about 7 hours. 8 hours is not, it's actually a little bit oversleeping at this point. Doctors no longer are recommending 8, but yeah, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm going to keep this to the psychological. But if we look at sleep and say over the next 2 weeks, for 12 of the 14 days, I will make an effort to sleep 7 hours a night. And then underneath that, so that's your goal, okay? Underneath your goal, put 2 objectives of how you're going to achieve that. One is, I will not drink caffeine after 6 p.m. 2 is, I will buy blackout blinds for my curtains as the sunlight's been waking me up in the tip. And then the second is, do I exercise regularly? I will go to the gym 3 times a week for 1 hour for the next 2 weeks. So take one or two from each major category and come up with a self-care plan. The evidence shows us two things that are helpful in predicting success of the management of a self-care plan. One is, which I've already indicated, is that it's written out and it's looked at daily. And Judith Beck found that in, as I said earlier, in the Diet Solution, the book she had came out a few years ago. The second part is by sharing this with someone you trust, so that there is some type of commonality or support that you're receiving from another adult. Psychological. Do I make opportunities for self-reflection? One of the objectives I would think with this is, once a week I will do self-reflection. For me, on Sunday nights, that's my self-reflective night. And so I journal on Sunday nights. So I would maybe say, we try to always, make these goals into the positive. So I will make an opportunity for self-reflection as evidenced by, and then put two mechanisms or objectives. One is I will journal for 15 minutes every Sunday. Two is I will share my reflection with my partner or whomever. The third area is the emotional sphere, or of the wellness wheel here that we're going to be seeing in just a minute. Do I maintain regular contact with important people in my life? Just a recent example, I've been attempting, my uncle, who's been my mentor, who's a Jungian priest, he's retired now for many years. We've been trying to connect by phone over the last week, and we keep missing each other. And so, one of the things that I find it healthy and helpful is when I have regular contact, even with my at times demanding position and my travel and things, when I make regular time to reach out to my parents, to my sister, to those people who are very close to me, with my mom and things, I find that I'm not as irritable, and that things aren't things just look much more hopeful. And so think about how can you have some type of regular contact. Now, one of the keys of making this a success is not to overdo it and not to expect too much of yourself. So don't put, or maybe rather reconsider things like, well, I'm going to talk to my dad for an hour every week. That's a lot. My suggestion to adults and to parents when I'm creating this is think of something simple, attainable, and behavioral. So what is simple? What is uncomplicated, so that you won't say, oh gosh, I've got to do this again? So maybe it's once a month. Maybe it's, maybe it's having lunch with your grandmother once every 6 weeks. And maybe it's a simple lunch. Maybe it's an hour lunch. Maybe it's not a whole afternoon, and so behavioral, when you're creating this plan, or when you're introducing this to adults, you don't want to put things maybe like I want to love my mom more, or my partner more, or I want to love my daughter more. You want it to be behavioral. So I will show my daughter that I care, as evidenced by every Saturday for 30 minutes I will spend playtime with her on the floor in the living room. So that's kind of how I devise that. Spiritual, am I open to inspiration? And I've got several techniques that we're going to be covering up here in a minute, but it's really a lot to do with, to me, is what is meaningful. And from the wellness perspective is, how do I prioritize things as an adult within the spiritual context? So do I regularly practice any of my beliefs? Or if I don't have any beliefs, what do I find meaningful in life? And so I think part of this is developing an appreciation for play therapy and expressive arts as an adult, because I think we as clinicians have to find this within ourselves, the meaning, before we can really engage others with it. And so this might look like, I will attempt to find meaning over the next week, as evidenced by, one, I will do a self-sand tray once a month. and we're going to talk about self-Sanchariya in just a little while. 2, I will color one mandala once a month and talk about the symbolism. For some of us, it might be going to church once a month or to synagogue. And then professional. This is the last one. Well, the balance kind of encapsulates all of it. But what's your workload? I really like number 3. Do I give myself, that sounds weird, I'm liking what I type, but basically what I'm trying to say is I think number 3 is really important for us as adults. Do I give myself quiet time to complete tasks? And I think that having a sense of silence is important, because I think as adults, we have so many thoughts going on, and the hustle and bustle of life and of noise and of people making requests and of our family members kind of unloading on us a lot of the time. It's important for us to take time in quiet. One of the things that I recommend adults do when I'm introducing play therapy about music is I ask parents, I said, when you're at work and you're sitting at your desk, do you listen to music? And many of them say no. So one of the things that I recommend is that they listen to music, very low, which is what I do, and many of my colleagues that I know do. But I also recommend that not just to listen to pop music or soul music or whatever it is, with vocals or things possibly, maybe that's on iTunes radio or satellite radio, but also to have some sense of a relaxation music. So every Thursday at work, or if I'm at home writing from home or doing research, I call that my nature day. And so I play music in the background that's like waves crashing from YouTube. They have like 2-hour videos of waves crashing, or a peace pipe. It's a flute playing, chanting, something that sounds more organic and not so produced and popular. How do I set limits with colleagues? I think that's important too. And then the balance. Do I make time to play? And that's sort of what's at the heart of this is we have to really, as practitioners, rediscover the joy of playing before we can really expect adults to play with us. That sounded kind of funny. But to engage with us in the psychotherapeutic context. So my question right now to those of you who are online, if anyone wants to answer, is how do you play? What do you do to find balance that is play-based or playful in life right now? Anyone want to chat or type in a comment on the right side of your screen to add to this? Does anyone have any things that they do to play? We'll just wait a little bit to see if anyone responds. Okay, so I can probably, all right, and let's see. Okay, so thank you all for being patient. I'm navigating through this to-go meeting formatting. So Megan, thank you for responding and thank you for being here. Megan says, I play hide and go seek with my partner. Terrific! Wow, that certainly sounds like it could be very exciting. And that's a terrific activity. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's something that many of us did as children, and for you to be able to engage with your partner as an adult, I think it speaks a lot about you and your abilities to appreciate the childlike and imaginative qualities. And so there's a few more. Hi, Judy. We have Judy Burns here from Australia. Judy, thank you for being with us. Judy says gardening. Yeah, I think gardening is a very soulful activity, as eating can be. Crystal, I'm sorry, Crystal says, I find playing with my dog is refreshing. Yeah, you really brought up a great point, and that is oftentimes after a long day of work or a long week, God, for some of us a long month or a long year, coming home to our cat or our dog, or just walking, there's something that's very play-based about that, because as many of us as kids had pets, many of us did, and it does, there's something healing. Alexandra says, oh, okay, wait, it's Celeste, gardening, making jewelry. Diane says that she plays the piano, and she has since her childhood. She loves the arts. Amazing. Diane, I wish we had volume here. I'd ask you to play a little piece. One of the piano concertos by Beethoven that I listen to relax, and I even play this when I'm doing guided imagery, is the Moonlight Sonata. I think it's so beautiful. Okay, so Beth says, I ride my bike with no hands. Yes, be free, Beth. Be brave. Next we have Enel, and Enel says, I will paint. The problem sometimes is that I want to be a perfectionist, and it's important to engage and play without judging ourselves. Absolutely, that's a good point. I think you're really piggybacking off and saying it much more eloquently, that we have to get out of our linear sort of rational, logical thinking, and you're absolutely right. Thank you so much. Kimberly says, these are great suggestions. I hope some of you are writing some of these down, because some of these I haven't even thought of. Going to the beach or riding bikes, okay? Candace says, I play with my child, lots of peekaboo. That's terrific, and plays with different toys to help her learn textures. Excellent. And colors too, and that's something else I think I encourage parents to do when I'm teaching them play therapy, is I say, if you're resistant to engagement and play with me, then what I try to do is I try to help them play with their kids first, so that they can be able to play with play activities and use it themselves. So here's the evaluation, or the wellness wheel. And this is sort of like what Jane Myers and Tom Sweeney and Whitmer did, and they've been publishing on this for many, many years. If you look at the center, this mandala, there's the spirituality piece, self-direction. What I would encourage you to do, we're sort of running a little long on time, and I have several activities I want to discuss with you. I would encourage you to look at this after the webinar and try to pick a couple of these spokes and see what you can do to explore them over the next month and incorporate this into your self-care plan. Sense of self-control, realistic beliefs about self and others. So now we get into the part of the webinar that's the second part, which is probably what many of you have been signed on for, which is, now that we've talked about the theoretical and research underpinnings of burnout, compassion fatigue, and self-care and renewal, and then we went into assessment. Now we're going to cover, once we become assessed, almost sounded like possessed, didn't it? Then we can go into how do we provide service delivery or execute those strategies towards renewal. And this is a picture just from very recently. This was at Johns Hopkins last month, I believe. Wait, we're in September. Yeah, this was at the end of July. And we're building. This is I'm with a group of adults here. I was teaching them how to build fairy houses. Ann Stewart and I provided this. And fairy houses are. It's also, we can call them resiliency relics. It's when we kind of look at things that are old or from our past that reminds us of something that, it's kind of like that solution-focused question, which is, what have you done to get beyond this from your past, or what worked for you before? That's sort of what a resiliency relic or a fairy house is. It's looking at what has worked in the past and what can you capitalize on that strength. A fairy house is taking a bunch of organic material from outside, like bark and trees, and maybe not a tree, maybe twigs that are dead that have fallen on the ground, maybe leaves, flowers that are maybe wilting, or we don't want to maybe kill wildlife there, but creating a little fairy house. And it's like an organic way of saying, like, this is my resilience, this is my refuge, this is where my inner fairies will come to play. It's a beautiful, beautiful activity. Ann Stewart is the one that introduced me to this. And adults really enjoy this. I don't do this with kids or teenagers. I only do this with adults. And they usually put them outside in their backyards. And there's different ways to do fairy houses and resiliency relics. But this is, if any of you have time this weekend and you've got some access to organic materials in your backyard or pine cones, I would suggest building a fairy house and sharing it with someone and talk about what this means to you. How is this, you know, a symbolic refuge for where the fairies would come to sleep at night? So we're going to go through some of these refreshers that we can all do for self-care and have a visualization activity. So here are some sort of some ideas that you can certainly maybe, you know, take notes on. Either you can introduce these to adult patients to try to. I would say these 4-minute refreshers are the precursor to actual doing the play therapy and expressive art designs, which would be like coloring mandalas, sand play, dream analysis, hide and go seek, those kinds of things. I think if a parent has resistance, or even if not, even if they're just experiencing burnout, or you as a practitioner, these are sort of easy, simple, really low cost or no cost things that you can do. And it starts to ignite, as James Hollis says, that archetypal imagination within us. We're going to come to poetry. I have a poem at the end that I'm going to read to you. But some of us find solace in poetry and writing poetry. Yeah, it's also somewhat intimidating. So one of the things that I encourage parents to do, or adults, is to find a song that they really like and to bring the lyrics to the session, or for them to share it with their partner at home on the weekend or at night, and to talk about, to listen to the lyrics and to the song without interrupting, without adding, oh, that's my favorite song, you know, just kind of keeping it very contained, and then having a chance to share about how those lyrics resonate with you. You know, songs are poetry. I mean, look at Carole King's, you know, and Dolly Parton. I mean, just beautiful. Those are sort of older examples. But you know, I think some of that is timeless. Blowing bubbles. So one of the things that I would suggest that we all do as practitioners, as adults, is have bubbles everywhere you go. I've got a bubble in my bag right now. I literally do. I've got a thing of bubbles. Blow bubbles, you know, first of all, blowing bubbles, it's not just a canned response. I have, as some of you are probably aware, I've done quite a bit of natural disaster work all over the world, and have been very fortunate to be able to do that type of work through the Red Cross and through World Vision. And one of the consistent findings is, even if, you know, and we've seen some destitute situations with parents and adults when houses have been destroyed and loss of life, bubbles don't make everything better, but somehow they bring a smile to people's faces. So I have bubbles in my office. I have bubbles in my playroom. I have bubbles when I do filial therapy. Now, I'm not like toting bubbles everywhere I go, but it's just I brought them today because I was going to, you know, blow some right now, but the way that we've set up the webinar, it's more straightforward with the PowerPoint. But go out and buy it. They're called gazillion bubbles. I I know some of you are not, you know, I saw a couple, or I recognize a couple of names. They're international. They're outside of the country. But you know, here in we have them at Walmart or at CVS, and you can find them on sale after holidays or even at the dollar store. They're like super bubbles, and they last a really long time, and they're huge, and they're really fun, and they stay there more strong or something. I don't know. I find buying those, if you look at those bubbles I have in that picture, those are like the cheaper bubbles I bought from the dollar store. Those like are really harder to blow, and so anyway, what I do is I tell a parent, blow bubbles with your kids. Go outside. There's bubble machines you can put on your porch. Get a bubble machine. And just, you know, when I was, before I moved out of Louisiana, when I was, that's where I'm from, my uncle, he had this huge bubble machine that would just blow beautiful bubbles all the time, and it was just kind of magical. So every time, you know, we would go to his house as adults, we would feel, you know, breathing deeply. Amy Mirica, regular co-writer of mine and a colleague, she talks about elevator breaths. And so we teach kids, and now I'm teaching adults how to do, is to imagine. So I want everybody listening to close your eyes for a minute, and I want you to take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And then I want us to just calm down and take another deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Now I want you to imagine an elevator inside going all the way up to the top. So take a deep breath and watch the elevator go up. And now the elevator is going to slowly go back down to the bottom floor, toward the bottom of your tummy. So breathe out. Now watch the elevator go back up slowly to the top. Take a deep breath in. Hold it. Look, the elevator's at the top. It's at the Chrysler Building. And then release. Okay, so just by a thing of yes or no, how many of you who participated in that feel slightly more relaxed than you did 2 minutes ago before we started? Okay, so everyone in this in the studio here is raising their hand, and Shelley does. Shelley Sweltzer, thank you for participating. Several. Okay, great. Judy, Diane. So this is a picture of me after Hurricane Katrina and Rita working with the children, and it was, you know, really hard to find anything to be happy about when your home is destroyed, when you have nothing left, when you can't even go back home, and some of these kids were abandoned, or not abandoned, but they got lost in the mass traumatic destruction at the convention center. So it's like, who do we think we are trying to make people happy? So I would just, in silence, I'd blow bubbles with them, and there was something healing about that. So take from that, and there's my lion in the back. You'll see my lion. That's my brave lion. He goes a lot of places with me. That's another thing we can do as adults. As kids, one of the things we did was we held, I'm sure y'all remember this, stuffed animals. I remember, I'm a child of the 80s, so when I was a kid, we had pound puppies. I don't know if anybody remembers those, pound puppies. I had a dark brown one. I called him Choco. Wow, that's a lot of self-disclosure, sorry. But one of the things that I've done as an adult is I have at my office at UNT, where I'm a professor, it's full of stuffed animals. And there's sharks and peacocks and all kinds of things. And so in my playrooms, I also include really plush, soft, stuffed bears and lions so kids can hold on to them. What I tell adults is don't be afraid to give an animal a hug, a little stuffed animal a hug. Don't be afraid to put a teddy bear in your office. There's something healing about that. Do any of you have any stuffed animals or any, if you have any in your attic, or if you go to by the Disney store at the mall sometimes, let's say, and you see the Little Mermaid, and you say, oh God, buy it, or take it out of your attic, or find one at a rummage. The thing is that when we surround ourselves with images from our past that are positive and healing, we can find solace in our present. And that's sort of the theme for today. Okay, so does anyone have any questions so far? I don't think there's any questions so far. All right, so okay. All right, so the next part, I think after we've done some of those refreshers, is to introduce the idea of mandalas with adults. I would say out of, and this is a personal perspective because I'm a Jungian-oriented therapist and a play therapist, I probably have a proclivity toward mandalas and sand play, especially since I've done so much writing on them. It's been such a big part of my professional delivery service model. However, with that bias being placed for transparency, I would say that coloring mandalas with adults is probably the single most popular and most prevalent play-based activity that I do. I've colored with thousands, been very fortunate with thousands of adults all over the world now when I do trainings. And some of you online, I recognize many of your names, some of your names, have actually done mandala trainings with me, which is exciting that you're here today. Thank you. And so for those of you who haven't, or for those of you who have not heard of mandalas, a mandala is a circular shape that has some type of design. It could also be square, sort of like the Buddhists have the sand mandalas where they paint sand, hand paint it, and they usually show them at museums for peace. And then after they're done, they wipe it clean. I created this technique, and it's certainly not original. Giordano Bruno in the year 1560, he called these magic circles. He found them in different places in literature, and so they've been around a while. Jung certainly had a lot of mandala imagery and talked about the totality of the self being represented by the mandala. And so, and then there's Dr. Fincher. She's published quite a bit on mandalas, and so have many. There's been several workbooks and things, I think, over the years. What I've done, or my contribution to a small, very minor contribution to this, is I've adopted them for very young kids. And so these mandalas come from my workbook called Color Your Mandala. You can certainly get these for free. You don't have to buy my workbook. I would encourage you. Some of you may already have a book of mandalas, but you can certainly get some of these at no charge by Google and just go online and search. I would encourage you to find a diversity of symbols. What coloring mandalas, what it does, I guess that's singular, yes. So what it does is the research shows, my research shows, and so does Rosen and Mascaro's, that it reduces hyperarousal and hypertension. Why? From my Jungian perspective, it helps us reconnect to our archetypal imagination, and there's something peaceful about that. From a behavioral perspective, the kinesthetic quality of coloring an image by hand in peace and silence is intrinsically healing. So while I typically do mandala trainings over like 2 full days. I'm going to do this in 5 minutes, so forgive me if it sounds rushed or if I've left out most of what should be here. I'm trying to encapsulate it in 2 minutes. This is a very complex topic, but I think with some basic training, you can certainly use it as a practical tool with adults. So I guess the first thing I want to say about coloring mandalas is you want to find some images that would be specific to adults. All these 3 images were all recently done by adults that I've been conducting trainings with. And I didn't include any of my patients or parents out of respect for them and their privacy. Oh, okay. So find some diversity of symbols. There are thousands of of symbols and of different types of mandalas. Many of them, some of them you'll find are for really young children. These are very specific to adults. Why? Because they're more complex. In my workbook, I have them, and some of you may even have a workbook already, as I said, but from the most simple to the most complicated. The second thing is you want to explain to the adult what a mandala is. A mandala is a circular shape. It's what we call a magic circle. And I tell them, the research shows that it produces calming effects. There's actually an empirical evidence that shows that it is an empirical process. It's not just a qualitative, investigation, but there's actual that it decreases hypertension, hyperarousal with patients who are grappling with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I think the first part is finding the actual symbols and what you want to work with. And I would encourage you to have at least 8 to 10 different blank drawings for an adult to choose from. The second part is the materials that you need. Other than the mandalas, I use colored pencils, colored markers, and crayons. And what I encourage you to do is to find the highest number of variability in those. So I only will buy like 64 or like 84 packs of markers, like with 84 different colors. You can actually go to the Dollar Tree. Well, that's probably specific to the South. But if you go and look at some of these discount supply stores, you'll see they'll have like 100 different shades of blue for like $10. It's amazing. So I would say invest in the most variability you can find. What I have found over time, the most helpful are colored markers, the really thin ones. That's the ones that most adults like the most, and so that's what I have the most of. They don't really like crayons. I don't know why. I think it's because markers maybe are more vibrant, maybe. And I noticed that colored pencils, I think I noticed children using those more. So I would say if you're on a budget, to go and to buy as many different colored markers and packs as you can with different hues of orange, pinks, reds. I also, if you have a little bit of money, buy glue, glitter. If you look at the middle, the peacock, all those little jewels, you can get those at Michael's Arts and Crafts, for those of you who are here in the country, wherever. I always have that on the side if they want to glue things or add. I also have buttons, yarn, all kinds of things. But what I find over and over is most adults just use, and I don't know, I've distilled this, the long colored markers. That's what they like the most. And so, if you look at the jewels on the peacock, that's an anomaly. Most parents or most adults that I work with don't typically do that. But I thought it was a real beautiful encapsulation of the different colors and the different parts of herself that she wanted to emblemize through this relatively nonverbal expression. The third thing is, after you introduce the activity, after you have the supplies, or maybe have the supplies first and introduce the activity, is for you to take the adult through 2 to 3 minutes of relaxation. So do the deep breathing technique. Maybe do progressive muscle relaxation. When you have the adult, everyone clench your fist, tight, tight, tight right now. Clench your fist, make a fist, clench them tight, tight, tight. Lean, bend your wrist towards the inside of your arm. so that it stretches, and then release. Everybody put your shoulders up by your earlobes so that you feel your neck. It's, oh, all the tension. Oh, I've got this intense. And then release. Okay. Everyone put your knees together, tight, 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 so your legs, the inside of your knees are pressed together so you can feel the tension in your legs. And then release. And then lean your head to the right so your ear's almost touching your shoulder. And then roll it slowly through the bottom, through the middle, so that it's down in the middle. And go to the left, so your head is toward the left by your left shoulder, your left ear. And then come back to the middle. And I want everyone to take a deep breath. Take a second deep breath. So right now, if we were with an adult, I would say, color your mandala. There's no right or wrong way to do this. After you're done, please write the story of your mandala on the back, and then you can just let me know when you're finished. While the adult is coloring the mandala, I usually sit in silence. I typically have relaxation music playing in the background on my laptop. I usually go to YouTube, and I have just, like just peaceful, soft, kind of like new age transcendental kind of music, very lightly playing in the background. Sometimes I'll play with Play-Doh, so I'm not just staring at the adult because that's kind of uncomfortable. Sometimes I'll color a mandala, but I'll really be focusing on what they're doing. The purpose of this is for them to have self-expression, to reduce anxiety, hyperarousal, hypertension, but it's also for them to connect their internal landscape with their external, and that's what the kinesthetic quality of writing the story on the back. For any of these expressive art activities to truly find the ability to bridge the inner to the outer, to create a sense of renewal, there has to be 4 different senses that are hit. The visual, the auditory, which would be the sharing of the story with the patient, the kinesthetic, which is the actual coloring, and an affective component, which means it's something that's important to them. That's why we allow them to choose their own mandala. After they're done, I say this, is there anything you'd like to share about your mandala? There's no right or wrong way. And then they share it with me. I don't really ask any follow-up questions anymore. Years ago I used to. What I find now is that it's really not necessary. It becomes almost like an interview, and that's not really what the purpose of this is for. It's sort of like sand play. We don't ask a bunch of follow-up questions. We just simply allow them to share. Now, if it's a child and they're engaging with me, then maybe I will say, if you were inside this mandala, what might you be feeling like? Or if you could give this mandala a title, what might it be? But that's very, I think, atypical. I think I've kind of migrated away, and if you're wondering how or why, I make an individual determination on the patient and my relationship with the patient and what they're sensing. Sometimes mandala imagery can be overwhelming. In fact, the adult who gave me permission to share this on the right, the third one, which would be, if you look at your screen, the orange and yellow one, this is actually was extremely emotional after this, and she wrote on the back and was crying profusely, and it had really tapped into a bereavement period that she had really skipped over. Her mother had passed a few months before, and she hadn't really grieved, and so this symbol, something about the symbol and going into it, entering, Jung says for us to change the affect, we have to enter it. So if we want to get rid of depression, we have to enter the depression. If we want to get beyond grief, we have to go into the grief. So for whatever reason, this symbol led her to that, and so that's why I didn't really ask many follow-up questions. I just really base it upon what they're wanting to share. And I sometimes do this with parents together, a mother and a father. Not they do the same one, but they each have their own. I encourage them to share it with each other by looking at each other in the eye, by using I language. I appreciate how you shared your story, instead of saying you did well or something like that. And that helps with communication between, in their relationship. Does anybody have any questions about mandalas before we move on? I know we've got about 25 minutes left, and I've still got about, I think, 30 slides. So I'm trying to be quick. Okay, there's no questions as of this point. All right. If you do have a question or a comment, or if you've used mandalas and you want to share something, please feel free to engage, and I'll be happy to respond to that. So continuing on with engagement of expressive means, one of the, I think I mentioned earlier, I do a brief journal. What I've found over the years working with many parents is their relationships sometimes with their kids are not optimal. Obviously, that's why many of them are referred, because usually kids don't self-refer, obviously. But one of the things I encourage parents to do is to keep a gratitude journal. And this is what I do. I think I mentioned earlier on Sunday nights, I have a reflective Sundays. In fact, I often post on Facebook. That's maybe like sometime the only time in the week I'll get a chance to, but I'll post something reflective, or I'll say it's my reflection. I ask parents to do 3 things that they're grateful for about their family, or 3 things about their kids, and to keep a gratitude journal. So when people, what I've found over the years, and I'm sure many of you recognize this, is when we get really excited about journals, we go buy nice journal things from Barnes or wherever, and we decorate them, and then it only lasts about a month, and then we get burned out because it's and so to try to troubleshoot those types of deficits, keep it simple, keep it attainable, and make it behavioral. So another part of this, of engaging parents in expressive arts, is visualization. This is something that I often don't have resistance from parents with, and I'm sure many of you have used guided imagery and visualizations with the adults that you work with. How I do mine differently, and part of this webinar, in keeping with the theme of today, is I try to incorporate visualizations that are specific to reigniting the archetypal imagination. So not that that's better than any other visualization you might be doing. I think, you know, a part of the process of visualization is to bring about a sense of peace and relaxation, and to allow the mind, to the imagination, to visualize imagery, and to kind of retreat into a psychological stratosphere of unencumbered creativity. So I have a visualization next, and what I want everyone to do is I want everyone to close your eyes for a minute. And this is what I would do with an adult. This is what I'm doing with you, obviously. And so I do want some of us to participate with this part next. So I want everybody to close your eyes, and I'm going to adjust my webinar voice to a more therapeutic, slower paced voice, which is how I typically speak in probably most of the time when I'm not presenting. I want you to take 3 deep breaths and imagine the elevator. Maybe do one of your squeezed fists, or shoulders up by your ears, or squeeze your knees together, a little progressive muscle relaxation. Self-care. Now I'm going to speak for a little while. I want you to keep your eyes closed, and right now I want you to, if you have any thoughts, I want you to acknowledge them and watch them float away, so that we're centering and clearing. So no thinking, if we can, become blank. It's really hard to do, but you can try. So take a deep breath and just focus on your breath. We're not thinking about anything but our breath. Now we're not thinking, we're just breathing. Now I want you to imagine that you're in some safe place, some place where you can sit or be, where you feel a sense of peace, a sense of calmness. What does that look like? Where are you? Find a place within that is your fairy house, your solace. What's around you? What smells do you encounter? Is there anyone there with you? As you're there, I want you to keep your eyes closed and listen to my voice. As therapists, as adults, as parents, many of us encourage each other, or we hear messages of, do only what you love. But what happens when we barely recognize what we uniquely love and what defines who we are outside of our work? Sometimes caretaking and being in relationships for others has transferred into a loss or deferment of our own dreams. So close your eyes and I want you to go back into your mind, into your imagination. Go back to your childhood. What did you look like? What did it feel like to be small? To have to look up to an adult, to talk to them? Think about those times, or that time when you were the happiest. Where were you? What were you doing? Think about when love was alive, when the sounds of wind chimes enchanted you, and blades of grass still smelled funny. When you enjoyed opening a new canister of Play-Doh. When smelling a crayon was fun, just because it was. When you looked forward to blowing out candles on your birthday cake once a year, and looked even more forward to when you could blow them all out in one breath. Who are you playing with? What were you playing? For me, it was building sandcastles at the beach with my family during summers in Pensacola, Florida. I remember as a child being content and napping in a hammock, and the gentle ocean breeze blowing through my tousled hair and through the ocean waves and the smells of the salt water, feeling relaxed and feeling alive. This is my archetypal imagination. And now activate yours. For there is something healing about revisiting these sources of happiness from our earliest recollections. Smell the smells again, the sounds, the images, the feelings. By retracing what brought us joy in our past, we are able to possibly relive bliss in our present. Who or what made you smile as a child? Was it music or dance or song? Was it your grandmother's cooking? Was it watching a certain TV show, maybe The Cosby Show on Thursday nights, NBC, 7 p.m.? Join with me, reflect, remember, and renew. Okay, Now, would anyone or all of those who'd like to share maybe an image that came up for you from an early recollection, please go ahead and share with us now. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts or ideas. A second part to this would be for me to ask the adult to draw some image or to paint some feeling from that experience. Sometimes adults or parents will say, well, you know, Dr. Green, I'm not a good artist. And I said, well, neither am I. I'm not really good at much, but I try. And so if they don't want to draw like a beach, or let's say they were in a mountain, if they went skiing as a kid and they remember the slope, then I would just say have an abstract, if they want to do something abstract about the feelings with that. And then after they complete that drawing or that mandala or that painting on the canvas, then I would ask them to write the story of it. You know, and after they finish, then I would ask them to share whatever they'd like. So I want to give you all just a minute here. If anyone wants to share an image that came to mind of a healing visual from their earliest childhood recollection, I'd love to hear from a couple of you. And as you're typing or thinking, this is an image of my archetypal imagination. Something about being at the beach. I go throughout the year. It's not very far from me in Texas. I just traveled down to Mexico. So this is a picture just recently of me in my little office area on that little boardwalk at the bottom. That's where I have this umbrella. And so I go there and I play in the sand. I write, and I feel reconnected. I took my mother there in gosh, I think that was May, and that was exciting. We got to build sandcastles, and I think I'm a much better builder than I was when I was a kid. And so I have a picture of me building a sandcastle a little bit later. I have another activity for us to do. Here's some more 4-minute refreshers. Write down a hope, a thought, a prayer for your client or for yourself. This is me doing a training. This picture at the bottom was from Mississippi from a couple of months ago this summer. I was doing a Jungian sand play training. And this is one of the things I do frequently with adults is, or patients, is I ask them to do a sand tray, which is when we take miniatures and then they create what's called a sand picture. And while they're using miniatures to create this scene, I remain quiet, and then when they're done, I ask if there's anything about their sand picture they'd like to share. Sand Play is a whole entire, very specialized entity. The Sand Play Therapist of America is the organization that provides the certification. It takes a couple years of doing your own personal analysis and doing 100 hours of Sand Play specific work. And we also have our annual Sand Play conference. We just had it in Seattle at the beginning of June. And then next April we have one in Baltimore. And then we also have the International Sand Play Society, International Sand Play Society. You know, it's something with an I and an S, and you can just Google it. But we're having our international conference. You know what I'm thinking about is ISIS, which is probably not a great thing. So it'll be next spring, and it'll be in Canada. And so while I wouldn't necessarily recommend you engaging in sand play work unless you have the credentialing, I think that there's something practical about using it as a self-care or renewal if you want to do this yourself. And so, you know, a lot of us don't ever think to do our own sand trays. I do them a couple times a month. I'm currently finishing my own sand play process. I'm finishing my credential to become a certified sand play therapist, and so I'm able to do that. But I also sometimes do it I have, of course, a sand tray in my practice in the sand play room, and every once in a while, if work is really stressing me, or if I'm allowing work to stress me, I'll do a sand, and then I'll take a picture, and then I'll just look at it on Sunday nights usually, and I'll just reflect on it. So. Do any of you use sand trays, or if any of you have sand trays. Again, it's probably, other than mandalas and guided imagery, it's one of the most prevalent expressive art modalities that adults find a connection to, which is almost counterintuitive because you'd think adults would maybe think it was childlike with all the figures. But if you look at the research, and I'm sure many of you have as you're professionals in this field, there really isn't much written of anything on sand play with kids. Most of what has come out, and Dora Kelt's model really was focusing on children necessarily, but also more adults. And so Kay Bradway's work and Harriet Friedman and Ree Rogers Mitchell and all of these tremendous talent in the sand play field over the last 20, 30 years have written predominantly on sand play with adults. So this is a common, I think, and it's helpful. It does produce a kinesthetic feeling of relaxation just by touching the sand. There is something that feels healing about it. So before I go on to the next slide, we have a comment here from Diane. And Diane says, I recall our family decorating the Christmas tree as a happy occasion. My brother, younger than me, would, after the tree was completed, go outside and come back in as if he were a visitor and would exclaim about the beauty of the tree. We would all laugh, and it became a tradition for him to do that each year. Thank you so much, Diane, for sharing that familial tradition. It sounds very special, and it's a testament to the playfulness that you and your family had, and that I'm sure you're probably bringing to your own circles now as an adult. Here are some additional, there's another mandala on the right. It's the Tree of Life. If any of you have any other familial recollections, feel free to share them. Listening to, we've already talked about several of these, progressive muscle relaxation, reading poetry. One of the attendees from the workshop I did recently, Ms. Teague, did this on the right. Catherine Teague, I believe is her name. And just a beautiful, beautiful imagery. And the instruction was draw, mandala. There was no, if you notice, this is a blank one. The other way to use this activity is to take a paper plate and just draw a circle, and then the adult can create anything they want, and that's what she did. I typically have adults color them so they get a sense of structure, but I let them always, of course, decide what they want. Celeste just chimed in, and she says, I remember swinging and singing together with my sisters. It's very special. I was just talking to a group recently, and I said, thank you, Celeste, for that reminder. I said, as adults, a lot of us, like I take my nieces or even my godchildren, Caitlin, to the park. There's a little park right by our house. And I notice I'll sit down on the bench and I'll watch and smile, or I'll be on my phone, or I'll be on Facebook or something, probably not the best thing. And one of the things that I started doing every once in a while was actually go swing with her now. And that's fun, and she enjoys it. So keep swinging, Celeste. This is a butterfly. Isn't this beautiful? I mean, just it was huge, too. It was probably the size of a door. I mean, it was enormous. Again, a sign of transformation. As I said earlier, we want to watch the signs as we go. And so this made me smile when I saw it. It was at North Park in Dallas. And so when you see things that make you smile, instead of, like I did, taking a picture or sharing it on Facebook, just enjoy the moment sometimes, maybe. Just smile. Not everything has to be recorded and cataloged on social media. So the third and final objective, and we're going to be wrapping up here in a couple of minutes, is the implications. This is for your third learning objective. The implications for self-healing by the use of expressive arts with adults and play therapy is accessing the imagination by bringing forth creative self-expression from childhood and finding some inner solace. And the implication for renewal is that reconnecting to healing parts of our past brings about self-renewal in our present. And that's a sand tray from a training over the summer that I did in, I think in Virginia. one of the pieces of renewal, and I encourage you all to do this as adults, is to light candles. So candles can be incorporated in sampling. There's something spiritual. There's a lot of folklore about lighting candles wards off evil spirits, but beyond the supernatural or preternatural, looking at the psychological, the flickering of the candle and of the aromatherapy oftentimes has a slight healing effect. So when you're watching, the next time you're watching a movie at home with your partner or your kids or by yourself, light a candle on the by your bed or on the table. And it adds an element of peacefulness. Here's some expressive therapies. If you look at that figure on the right, that was from Baltimore this summer when I was. You can part of renewal, I think, is rediscovering our relationships with our family members and what they could mean to us. So one of the things that I do with adults is I have them pick a sand miniature. It's a family genogram, but it's done pictorially. I got this idea from Eliana Gill. And to find a symbol that represents the mom, look, there's, the fairy, the mom. She placed Zeus as the dad, which is symbolic of, the thunderbolt and the authoritative figure possibly. And that's me in the back there with Dr. Ann Stewart at Johns Hopkins this summer, and we're doing symbolism work. If you all look closely at this picture, you'll see those are all mandalas of dreams and of symbols that these adults were doing, and we just had a fabulous day that day. Here's one by Julio Cervantes, a former student of mine. It just did isn't this interesting? He did like earth, wind, water, and fire, the crossroads of life. Jung says that we meet our destiny on the very road we take to avoid it. So it's an interesting cross-section there that he provided. Because we're out of time, basically, another way you can participate in self-healing and renewal is creating a sand tray of your dream. This is one about being a turtle at the bottom of the sea with the well, and there's some connection that happens by externalizing that image outwardly. We're out of time, but you can certainly read. This is a technique I've created recently called building sandcastles in the sky, and it's about sort of like the fairy house and the resiliency relic, except we use the sand picture. Here's my sandcastle that I built just a couple months ago. As I said, I go to Mexico throughout the year to get to some relaxation in the beach, and that's my sandcastle in the sky with the toys, and that's what it is. You're finding objects, you're creating something in your sand tray for resilience. Before I go on to the blessing, I want to see, is there anyone who has any questions or any final comments since we're just about out of time? I know I went through a lot of this very quickly and probably could have spent an entire day with you on this, but I tried to make it as specific and as detailed as possible so that you can use this PowerPoint as a resource. Okay. Okay. Alexandra says that, comment from earlier, she saw herself for the guided imagery, jump roping and engaging with her dogs. The feeling was calming. It felt safe and happy. Thank you for sharing that, Alexandra. We appreciate it. Does anyone have any final comments or anything that they'd like to share with the group about maybe another activity? If you want to think about that, I'm going to go ahead and close with a, earlier I talked about poetry and scripture or powerful quotes as kind of something to rejuvenate. So I have this Gaelic poem by John O'Donohue. Poor Johnny. He untimely passed away a couple years back. I believe he died of a heart attack. He was an Irish author and poet. He wrote this beautiful book called Eternal Echoes. It was a gorgeous book. He also wrote Beauty, the Invisible Embrace. And he was a brilliant poet and was taken away from us all too soon. But I wanted to kind of close with one of his most beautiful poems. It's called Benacht, which is the Gaelic term for blessing. Also, if you'll notice, on the second sentence of the second column, there's a word called currach, and that is the Gaelic term for canoe. I'll close with this blessing for you. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the gray window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colors, indigo red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the currach of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. Thank you, John O'Donohue, for that beautiful poem. I want to thank all of you for your time today for this 2 hours of self-care and renewal. I hope that it was healing in some small way, or at least gave you some new ideas of what you can do to integrate play therapy with adults. I also hope that if you took 2 hours out of your busy workday, that this provided you some maybe brief or needed respite from the otherwise busyness of the day. I believe there's, okay, there is a comment. Thank you, Diane. You're very welcome. Yes, it's mandalas can be used, and I'm glad that something about that resonated with you, as I hope you may explore using mandalas with your adult clients. Some of us see these and we think it's just with kids, but actually, predominantly now, it's strange. I use them with adolescents and adults. So I also, and if anyone has a final question, we're wrapping up here in just a minute or two, or a minute, about 60 seconds left. I do want to say to let your colleagues. We've recorded this webinar and it will be up on the American Mental Health Foundation's website. So if you found it helpful, or you think you have some colleagues or friends that may find this presentation useful, it is being offered as for social work and for play therapy CEUs. And if you go to the AmericanMentalHealthFoundation.org, they can register for it after. It'll be on the website for quite some time, the recorded version, which you can purchase. I also have a second webinar for the American Mental Health Foundation that we'll be filming in New York, just like this, on November the 6th. And as I said previously, that'll be on disaster mental health. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with you. If there are no other questions or comments, just as a reminder, if you go to the American Mental Health's website, you can complete your evaluation. It's a very brief one, and do this brief quiz to get your CEs. You get 2 hours of CEs. I wish you all a fabulous weekend. I'm going to go out and enjoy the last few moments I have of New York City before I fly back home to Dallas. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for your commitment to adults and to the play therapy and expressive field. It's been my pleasure, and I wish you all well.